from Ireland to Israel in the form of dual-use goods and goes from Israel to Ireland in the form of weapons that have been battle-tested on Palestinian civilians. Thanks.
The principle of competitive tendering for government contracts is used by the Department of Defence for the acquisition of defence equipment for the Defence Forces. This is an EU law requirement in accordance with the Defence and Security Directive. Central to these procedures is the requirement to allow fair competition between suppliers through the submission of tenders following advertising of the tender competition on the tender site and on the official journal of the European Union, where appropriate. Such tender competitions are open to any company or country, subject to the terms of all UN, OSCE and EU arms embargoes or restrictions. There are no such restrictions or embargoes in place on Israel or Israeli companies at the moment. I am advised that the Department of Defence has purchased defensive equipment from Israeli companies, as set out in value terms on foot of a table that I'll go through in a minute. The expenditure primarily relates to ground surveillance radars, engineering equipment, fire control systems, and the upgrade of the unmanned aerial vehicles operated by the Defence Forces. During this period, no equipment has been purchased directly from the State of Israel. However, in 2021, engineering, non-lethal equipment was purchased from Israeli military industries, which is understood to be wholly owned by the State of Israel. So in the year 2019, there was €646,000 spent on equipment that came from Israeli companies. In 2020, it was €486,000, and in 2021, it was €667,000, and there's no spend so far this year. So these, in expenditure terms, are relatively small amounts of money for non-lethal equipment. Mainly in the protective and information space from an engineering perspective, fire control systems, surveillance radars, systems, and so on.
Dr. Murphy.
Thanks. It's 1.7 million or so in the last 3 years to Israeli armaments companies.
No, not armaments companies.
But they are. They're Israeli companies that are providing military equipment to the Irish state, to the Irish.
It's not arms, though. Sorry. Just to be clear.
So, a couple of questions. One, you say there's no arms embargo. Do you agree there should be an arms embargo on a state that has been defined as apartheid by Amnesty, that is being defined by Amnesty as operating a racist and cruel system of apartheid within the State of Israel, within the occupied Palestinian territories in Gaza, and against the millions of Palestinians exiled in the Palestinian diaspora? And I particularly make the point, just a minute ago, you made the point that Ireland's a neutral state, which means we get to choose whose side we're on, and we're not bound by any alliances and so on. So then, in that case, let's have an arms embargo on Israel, and let's say clearly we're on the side of the Palestinian people who are being oppressed by the Israeli state.
Well, I mean, as the Deputy knows, Ireland doesn't decide on arms embargoes. The trade policy of the European Union is decided collectively and proposed by the Commission and debated by Member States. In relation to the Amnesty International report, we had a very good debate on that report in this House last week. And I know there was a debate also in the Seanad in relation to it, and it highlights a lot of very important issues that Ireland continues to bring to light and to focus on. I would say Ireland is the most vocal country in the European Union in relation to the treatment of Palestinians by Israel, focusing on the expansion of settlements, settler violence, forced evictions, and so on and so forth, illegal activity. We are constant and consistent in our criticism of such illegal activity. Deputy, we don't decide ourselves unilaterally on arms embargoes. You know that, or at least you should.
Dr. Murphy.
Thanks. So a clear question. Are you in favour of an arms embargo on Israel? That's what Amnesty recommends. Are you in favour of it or not? Secondly, can I ask, you made a clear statement earlier that the government is on the side of Ukraine against Russia. You say that's Okay, yeah, I'm also for the defeat of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, for the repulsion by the Ukrainian people. But will you make a similar statement about Palestine? To say the Irish government is on the side of the Palestinian people against the Israeli state? I ask you to make a similar statement. You're saying there's nothing stopping us, that's not what neutrality is about and so on. Let's make such a statement. And then as part of that, let's say that it is horrendous to have an arms trade with a racist apartheid state, guilty of killing 9,000 Palestinian civilians in the past 2 decades, 1,000 Palestinian children. Let's speak out clearly against that. Let's take the side of the oppressed as opposed to the oppressor. But to be clear, are you in favour of an arms embargo? And will you say clearly the Irish state is on the side of the Palestinians against Israeli oppression?
Minister.
Deputy, Ireland hasn't made any proposal in relation to an arms embargo on Israel. What we are doing and what we will continue to do is speak to both the Israeli and Palestinian sides to try to advance a peace process that is desperately needed. And we have continued to do that. We've called out illegality when it's taking place. I have been very clear and at times quite forceful in my language of criticism of Israeli government policy towards Palestinians. And I have invested a lot of time on behalf of this House and the Irish people in terms of ensuring that Ireland is a relevant contributor to that debate. But ultimately, this is about trying to find a way forward for a peace process that can allow for a two-state solution, that can ensure that Palestinians, in terms of their rights to a state of their own, can actually realise those rights. And that is our focus and will continue to be.